Well, let's talk about ancient shipbuilding and an art that was lost for a long, long time. In the ancient Minoans, and we'll make some connections here. This picture here is a ancient Minoan warship running into and ramming really another type of ship. Looks like an early Greek trawler, small trireme style something, proto-trireme, pre-trireme. Anyhow, what you see here are these people all up on the deck, so there's a whole lot more than the people rowing it. There's basically about 100 people or more involved with this, along with oarsmen, steersmen, the champion or the guy that's calling out everything, the man in front, who's also helping in this endeavor, and all the extra fighters that are involved with it. Notice that it has a white hull on it. That's something shown in a lot of depictions, and we'll get into that here in a minute. It's a white hull, and at the top part of the ridge, which would go riding right above the water, they show rolling wave patterns in blue and a black swirls inside of them. And then a red line that goes below that. So their major colors are like red, white, and blue, even a red keel. And then the blue highlight, really, and gold or copper. Yeah, so let's look into this. This is a 3,500-year-old advanced Minoan technology that was kind of lost art, if you will, not seen again until the 1950s. The Minoans employed advanced construction methods using natural materials to create seaworthy composite ship hulls which could not be out of place in modern-day marinas even. The construction method does not appear to have been used by or transferred to other thalassocrates which followed, i.e. the Phoenicians. The technology represents a lost art before 1500 BC that would not be seen again until the 1950s AD. The reader's attention is drawn to a modern day yacht and a representation or a reproduction of a Minoan hull. Note the similarities, not in just the peaking front and backs and situations and a staff central located, but both are white, streamlined, and watertight, and advanced for their time, just like that lighthouse is over there. But that's for another video. Construction of a Minoan hull. A hull would first be constructed from wood to create a former or a frame. There are two methods that were known at the time. First was used by other civilizations was a drill and a rebate wood planks to accommodate rope and hold the planks together with wedges inserted from inside the hull to provide tension on the rope to pull the planks together. You can see this kind of in the Egyptian style and what we talked about in being the Sumerian style of boats that were being built back then. And they had kind of a hybrid thing where they would try to seal it too with pitch, but any gaps between the planks would be filled with flax or hemp fibers, and pitch was applied to provide a watertight seal. Pitch was made from pine resin mixed with pulverized graphite from fire. So here's a ship reconstruction that they've done a video on here, and it shows a couple of the dolphins that's just like you see in Minoan Palace art in Knossos. Here's a video on how to process raw pine resin. There's a pine tree, and they get the resin out of it, and what you can do with resin and rosins. A lot of these things are in the Bible and stuff like that, and aromatics, and used different places and stuff like that. In fact, here's a girl right here that's all into it, and she tells you how to purify resin. Looks like she's got some big booger stuck between her fingers. That's pine sap, and then you purify it and stuff. And what can you purify it into? Well, you can make a few products, none the least of which is turpentine and rosin from that pine sap. And you can take that rosin and do a lot of things with it. In fact, there's a recent paper that's come out, and I did a video about it, to where they figured out the ancient Egyptian mummies were swathed in a material much like this that had been heated up and then pasted over them, sealing them like a cocoon with this pine tar resin that had to do with refined bitumen and apparently turpentine type things. So they basically shellac or something, or he lacquered the people and the stuff in this dark pine resin. And so that shows you the depiction of why they have them the way they look they do sometimes, but yet at the same point it's very thinned out because it's been done on a layered paint thing and then smoothed out onto it. Of course, being trapped in the hot desert and get around 150 degrees and it becomes liquefied. But nothing reaches that point, so it's got a good threshold. It's not too far above it. This method was employed by a reconstruction team, and the crew report that the hull would creak at sea. So in other words, going across waves and stuff, it would creak a little bit as the plank moved against one another. But it would hold together. They wouldn't leak. It was not the timber frame that made the hull watertight, though. It was the linen cloth that they applied. Linen cloth? What are you talking about? Well, this all goes together. The reconstruction team would make their best guess because the Minoan technology was improved over millennia with a myriad of alterations over generations of palace-controlled shipyards. But a second method they talked about was known for hull construction, was one that used strong mortise and tenon joints, but it fell out of use after this period. The abutting planks, typically cypress trees, were rebaited to provide a slot, so a slot was cut in it and a hole was drilled into each plank to be joined. A hexagonal biscuit shim with holes at the top and bottom was inserted, and a tapered dowel was inserted in each of the holes to provide a secure fixing. This method has a distinct advantage over the first, and as a tapered dowel self-centers and pulls the planks together to provide a strong joint. It's more likely that the Minoan shipwrights used this method based upon the quality of their carpentry, as illustrated by the Thera tripod table, which shows a quality approaching, if not equaling, Chippendale furniture. So if we'll look at this picture here, on the left, they're showing how you take two boards and then you run a drill through it of an exacting size. Same size you do this biscuit that's done out of this different type of wood. Now this wood swells quite a bit more than cypress is, which is known to be a water wood, if you will. And so once you join these two together and you put the biscuit in there and drive the dowels there and this becomes wet, it makes this seal that really is pretty much impenetrable. They put bitumen in between here and that makes a real good seal. Well, hold on, there's another seal and it made it watertight, but it also made it streamlined more and much more durable and hell, prettier altogether, and just so much more, because what we're talking about is something that's much like ancient fiberglass. Yeah, if you've ever seen somebody apply fiberglass and make something like this, even boats today, it's not too much different in technology. Now this over here at the right, you can see this table that they found. And, well, they didn't really find it. It's a plaster cast made by the void left by a Minoan tripod table at the Thera eruption. Yeah, the big one that we talked about a bunch of times. That eruption, just like Pompeii, sealed a lot of things into it. And so finding this, they poured it full of plaster and then shipped it all out of there. Kind of a one-time shot, if you will. But look at this thing and these lion legs that it's got that are delicately positioned, and how they all join up in filigree and stuff like that. You should probably do a whole video on this, or this and a few other artifacts. They had all kinds of advancements. But this is just about boats, really, kinda. The secret to superior hull was the application of linen cloth onto the wooden hull after it was made, like we talked about, and the wetting out of the cloth with pine resin, a natural polymer that becomes liquid above 75 degrees Celsius or 158 degrees Fahrenheit, which can be pigmented with powder additives such as the frescoes that they have suggested, and it's sealing the hull. It's interesting to note that the aerolinen offers similar technical properties to modern day e-glass, which is like fiberglass, and is around 3 times as strong in tension as a cotton cloth, largely due to the long staple length of the flax or hemp fibers. It is used today for bookbinding to provide a hard weaving cover or hard wearing cover. The Minoans exported high quality cloth that is roughly the quality of fine weave aerolinen. We talked about before, it's kind of like percale. And then by leaving out certain points in this and making it thinner, that's that gossamer type fabric. The Egyptians were quite famous for it too, but theirs was known to have been superior above people. Things like this is what Herodotus ran around and noticed that the Colchians have this type stuff and the Egyptians have it. He said they look a lot like the other people around here, so that's nothing new. What's really weird is the way they do their linens, a couple of their rituals, and the fact that they circumcise. He was kind of proud that he noticed it himself. So here you can see that it could be made white with a calcite type material or others, and then red ochre could be applied very easily in the way that they do that, but also blue by using lapis lazuli or other pigments like Egyptian blue. Well, that comes on kind of a little later, doesn't it? Well, they had this other one too that was made out of copper sulfate, but it always kind of blue-greened out. But they had their own blue. You can still see it to this day. It's different. Although it's impossible to know without a Minoan wreck, it is likely that strong, thin wall hull was employed, significantly reducing weight and materials with potentially a secondary eternal skin applied. So one on the outside, one on the inside even. In some respects, the use of this composite is more useful than a modern day equivalent, a thermostat epoxy resin used for making fiberglass. A natural composite can more easily be repaired or resurfaced with heat. In practice, placing a spear tip in a fire and applying it to the hull will resurface it to a glossy new finish. One would wonder too if they didn't wax the hulls with the bee wax that they were very famous for having so much of and procuring. Yeah, the bee people. The composite hull had many advantages over a plain wooden hull. It provided a lighter weight for the craft, hydrodynamic improvement, reduced form and skin friction drag, for greater speed and maneuverability, improved hull structural strength, and was able to withstand open sea voyages with easy maintenance and repair, and actually some battles and things, and make it through that a whole lot easier too. So here's a little speculation. Perhaps this innovation came about by a bowl of pitch resin being accidentally spilt on sailcloth once. This advantage was likely to be controlled by the palace shipyards as it represents such a significant advantage. It may have been a Minoan state-controlled secret. An interesting possibility is that the limestone powder was replaced with metal powders sometime. The Minoans were fascinated with aesthetic, making it look pretty, which is clear from so many artifacts and pieces of art and frescoes. For example, the processional flotilla fresco shows the entire fleet ship shape in Bristol fashion with wonderful decoration. It's adorned with the fastest animals of the ground, sea, and sky. And so indicating this mercuric speed that they had and would utilize. So they're using dolphins and so on like that, but also even in the head standards of the ships, which if you looked back in that other one, it was a lion, and other ones I'm sure are very much Phoenician and dragon-esque and so on. So here's that fresco, and they're all white-hulled ships. And this is showing that flotilla of hulls trading islands, paying tribute in the head of a herd of Carians, which basically was Marines, at Delos for service. Seems likely the Minoan palace workshops or yard would have experimented with metal filings from the metal workers to see if metallic quality could be imparted to the hull. Metal filings are produced whenever a hard bronze saw or file is used on a softer base metal of tin or copper. Metal filings are used today to give plastic cast parts a metallic appearance whenever it's cold cast. Although this may, I mean, you can also think about taking something as gold foil or something like that and utilizing it in places. And sure, you can see that on some of the Egyptian ones too. But although this may have been explored entirely for aesthetic reasons, there would have been useful side effects if they had done so. Barnacles would not build up on a copper or nickel impregnated hull, allowing for higher speeds maintained by oar or sail. The Royal Navy copper cladded hulls for precisely this reason. That's how they had the metal ships. And of course, it was for helping versus cannon damages and so on. Copper bottomed ships outperformed those of another navy, and by this low drag performance advantage was closely guarded. Metallized nickel impregnated hulls would do the same, likely recorded as white on the frescoes. So we look at this fresco here of it, and you can see that much like the Egyptian ships, or even the people themselves here, are shown in a depiction where they have this barge and a cabin built onto it, and we see that swirl, and it's kind of neat. From the very point on the left over here, it comes down with one little swirl that goes over and under. It reaches a point, it becomes swirls, and then it goes a little longer, and then waves up crash, and it becomes doubled over, and it goes and goes and goes. In this art, where you can see it in all the people of the locality of the time, men are drawn with red ochre depictions, and females are drawn pale. You can see that in Egypt, Minoan, Etruscan, Greek art of the time and everything. And of course, you'd know, being out on the sea and doing these things like sailors would get, they get quite tan. But in this depiction also, they have this blue that's shown around there that's not just the water, but up there, it's actually in the inside of the hull, and they show that. And that's a little different than a common Egyptian or even of this time normal appearance. It's an aspect ratio situation, kind of looking into the hull. And this guy here says, well, it's the only large ship in the procession. It's kind of separate in that fresco, and it's not white. It has 40 oars, though. It's also interesting to note that the frame of the captain's cabin seems to have the same coloring. That suggests that composite reinforcement may also have been applied internally and also to reinforce and make watertight or join other structural components. It's also interesting to note the artistic paints the interior of the hull in blue, ignoring the Egyptian drawing convention that shows scenes in strict side or plan elevation, so you don't do doubled edges and sew both sides or anything, rather than perspective. It is as if the artist wanted to record the Minoan technology as an advantage, like peekaboo, if you know what I'm looking at. Wider applications. It seems strange that the Minoans didn't appear to have employed this construction method for other objects, though. But then again, composite materials shows up not too much longer with the, who is it? Yep, the Hyksos show up with composite bows and other situations that are working on this same type technology in a different standard and way. Or perhaps they did, but the evidence is not to be found in literature or archaeology, noting that they would naturally degrade over time. However, they did exploit the advantages of material composites in shields. Yep, they did it in shields too, and there's even things where they talk about it having multi-layers inside of it of a fabric and leather on either side of it glued to it. And then there's a basket weaving technique, and then there's another layer of leather, and then cloth, and then leather, and so on. Perhaps they never understood or the underlying strength of cloth resin composite, though, as the resin would bond to the substrate, and they may have thought its application was limited to making large structures watertight. Today, composite parts are laid up on formers, which have a wax or silicone spray applied so that the part can be demolded, which requires considerable force. Yeah, so you'd have to use something like, well, that beeswax kind of fits in there a little bit too, but how could you apply it and do all these things? Well, you just keep it up to temperature right there near it, and then work with it. And if you could heat the side of the boat and go with it as you're working onto it, it'd meld right into it. So it pops out of these forms. Well, think of that kind of like no stick spray for in your oven for baking and such. Huh? This said, the Minoans prized beeswax in their toolbox of lost wax casting. Yeah, so they would take and make lost wax casts of something and then burn it out, and it would leave a cast, and then you could fill up full of metal, and ta-da, it replaces it. Hope you don't know what lost wax casting is. So perhaps they may have experimented with other applications. As with so many things the Minoans did, they show ingenuity and creativity, but perhaps the next intensive steps were less obvious, and this technology was limited to their maritime pursuits, linen cloth being valuable and time-consuming to spin and weave. And of course, doing it at this level is, yeah, definitely so, because you would think that a person trying to get a shirt, a smock, or so on, or a kilt that they had at the time, is a small piece of fabric compared to what it's going to take to make a sail or to cover the entire hull of a boat with. You're using extremely large pieces, perhaps larger than the Shroud of Turin situation. I mean, is it, well, this thing is 50 feet long. Is it 50 foot? Is it 100 foot? Does they keep looming it out until it can do the whole thing in one piece? Or is it applied in smaller pieces like fiberglass quite often is? Nonetheless, it was an advantage or faster and more agile fleet. Ships were able to easily repair and service. What must foreign ports have thought of these ships with their fine linens and fine lines, perfect hull, and splendid decorations. They are the modern-day equivalent to a superior yacht. They would surely have inspired awe and attention in other people seeing them. That may have assisted the Minoan merchants to advertise their arrival and wares. Of course, people, they would have certain wares, but other people would have other wares. You know, it's quite often that they would find people that were doing something and they would help to show them how to make it better, so it was really tradable with them. Yeah, make it worth my while. I'm going to trade you with this, so this is... Because if I can get them cheap enough and sell them for a little bit more, you can go around merchanting this stuff. Go on and on and on. Oh, over and above that, what's in the jug? Sometimes they came full. Quite often that's the case. Palace workshops. It is interesting to note that Icarus was accredited with inventing the sail. Yeah, Icarus that goes to the sun and so on. And that aerolinen was used on the first aircraft to provide a skin using a similar method to seal flight surfaces over a tight or light skeleton frame. Yeah, the Wright brothers, and gossamer fabric over frame. If you've ever seen somebody hand build 3D models, they make this little framework and then they take and put over it. Of course, in modern day, it's like a plastic film that they're using. But just before that, they were doing something very much like this. It's a fabric and glue, and you glue down each one. And they'd use like hair dryers and heat it up. It would soak into it, and it'd fuse to it. Yeah. Perhaps there's a substance to the fabled flight of Daedalus and Icarus. The feasibility of such will be explored in a future article on a future video. Minoan hulls are seaworthy, fast, maneuverable, and repairable, a distinct maritime advantage that other societies were unable to reproduce. So, It tells here in the author's notes that they say, well, some of these boats, the people are facing one way and doing the other. And so are they paddling or are they actually rowing backwards or so? And they said, could this actually have hooked up in it a double mechanism to where whenever you push, it pulls something and they're faced the other way and still doing the oars the same way? You know, it's kind of interesting. Another one. Also, it says that the crews are all nude, which is unlikely. It'd be hugely difficult. The oars illustrated, passengers would likely have been wearing clothing. But, of course, in a lot of their arts, they show nude. You know, it's funny, we look at a lot of their art and it just shows all these titties hanging out, a lot of nude type stuff. And then you look what we find from it, it doesn't seem like it was quite as prevalent as what they were showing to you. A lot of people look at that as being like, I don't know if you're trying to show archaic form coming in, or what are you trying to show with that? Minoan shield technology, a wooden frame, wicker subframe to absorb kinetic energy, and many skins of leather stapled and likely glued together by a shipwright. Yeah, so it's a lightweight fiberglass and leather composite shield. And of course, it's made by them shipwrights. Yeah, so kind of like masons, these shipwrights had a lot going on. And of course, you know, maritime people, they had a lot of it going on. And we still use a lot of their nomenclature and things today because it's attached to stuff like this. But here's a fiberglass-esque hull for ships that really is an advancement that nobody gets back into again until the 1950s, whenever fiberglass starts getting fancy. Then they all of a sudden started making yachts out of it, and some racing yachts started using it and taking it all to a next level again. But then again, these guys were using something very similar and racing around with it, well, until a giant volcano blew up and just about took them out of civilization, and they scattered among the people. Like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy. Peace.